the products that are going to get the planet to a future low emission space. I think we need to think about how we don't all run like a group of 5-year-olds in a soccer match to the next new shiny thing like lithium, and then find that the old supply demand bites people, and then once a company's been bitten in a particular area, it'll shy clear for a period of time. So, I think there is also a piece about let's be more holistic about what does the world really need. I think we know what the world needs, and it is quite a diverse group of elements, effectively, that we need for future state. So it's actually about how do we balance that so that we haven't got everyone rushing to one area and then going, oh, that didn't work, let's rush somewhere else now, but actually holistically looking as an industry at how much is enough in a particular space.
Today I'm speaking with Jill Terry. Now, Jill is one of those interesting people with such a cool career that I couldn't wait to speak with her. It's turned out to be taking 10 months to make sure that I could finally sit down with her. So the week before Christmas, it's happened. And we had a lovely conversation. These are never really interviews, and just having a conversation with somebody with an interesting background and it's got so many ideas about the industry that are worth listening to. So I hope you enjoy it. We talk about ESG and diversity and inclusion, but also about company strategies, which companies get it right, what is getting it right. We talk about critical minerals, what's happening in the industry at the moment, and Jill's thoughts on that. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. I really was quite impressed with your contributions, well, not just to Jorg, but to the industry at large. And one of the questions that I'd love to get into is, where do you find the time? Because that seems to be a common theme for a lot of the people that come on the channel. There's so many cool things that they've done in their careers, and I find it fascinating to understand how they fill up their day and how they make it all work. But yeah, so thanks for coming on. I appreciate you finding the time right at the end. And for those listening, the reason why it took a while is because obviously, as you'll probably explain with the role change that you've had, you're a bit freer to chat these days. So maybe that's a good angle. If you maybe give us a background of your pathway into the industry and what got you excited about mining in general. Was it a fluke entry, or did you always want to get into that? What was the angle?
So it's interesting that I think it's very similar to many people that it was by chance. I grew up on a farm to the west of Melbourne, so I liked the outdoors. The outdoors was important to me. And I had always thought that I would do vet science. We had the University of Melbourne vet school vets who would come across to look after our cattle, and so I was exposed to that. And I think exposure is a really important thing. So that was my goal. Did year 12, did not get into vet science, and I was told, do first year science at Melbourne University, try and parallel the vet subjects, and if you get the marks in first year, move across to vet science. I had to pick up one filler subject, and I had a choice of geology or meteorology. Now, my experience of geology in high school was not fantastic. It was we did a field trip to Studley Park to map faults and folds and to find graptolites, but it was a typical Melbourne wintry, drizzly day. The paper ended up as paper mache. It made it worse because my aunt was the year 9 science teacher, so that was embarrassing. and so I'd never really had a lot of interest. Took up first year geology, and within 6 weeks it ticked every box. And so vet science went out the window, and geology was there to stay. I guess the other thing, I was really, really lucky that my intake year was the very first year, the last year of the final intake for the University of Melbourne School of Mines, because it used to have one. And so from second year onwards, we were able to take mining subjects, metallurgy subjects. That was my introduction to geostatistics. And so over and above a geology degree with quite a bit of chemistry thrown in, I also had the exposure to the mining subjects and did the mapping in Tasmania
Oh,
and
lovely.
many times actually for mines that are now closed.
Yeah,
And it was in my blood all along, I suspect, but
yeah.
I was really, really lucky to fall into it.
How cool. Yeah, and it's so funny how different people roll into geology and then realize that, why didn't I see this before? It sounds that sounds really cool. And how did you end up in your first job then out of uni?
So that was that was interesting. I had visited Western Australia once, actually during Year 12, and my father's younger brother was also in WA. They had sheep stations in the Gascoyne, so I'd been up to that part of WA. I loved everything about WA when I'd visited, and so I literally drove to Adelaide, put myself and my car on the train, and headed across to Perth. And it was typewriters in those days. With my typewriter and the phone book, I wrote to every mining company that was in the phone book, and I was really, really lucky to. Well, actually, initially, Lindsay Bottomer, who I think is still in the industry, he picked me up for a part-time role. He was leading exploration with Aberfoyle at the time, and but the condition was that I keep applying for a full-time role. That full-time role came up at the Telfer gold mine. At that stage, it was Newmont Holdings, so I have come full circle. And so I was picked up as the baby geologist. As a graduate. There were no formal graduate programs in those days, but I had amazing mentors with hundreds of years collectively of experience who really then taught me the ropes from the beginning. So
Right,
yeah,
right.
that was how I got the first job.
Yeah, cool. And how then did you get? Were you always keen to? Climb the ladder, I guess, into the corporate space, or were you? Because a lot of
No,
people just want to keep their boots, firmly in the field. And
yes.
what was the motivation to end up with the roles you ended up with? Maybe.
Yeah. So, first 23 years of my career were on mine sites, and I loved that aspect. So it was a combination of doing the mine production geology as well as exploration.
Yeah.
And that was my buzz. During that time, I also had 4 children, so worked the career
Wow.
around the kids.
Yeah.
And it was really in 2000 and, well, actually late 2001, early 2002, there was a role advertised at the Octetti mine, so I put my name in the hat for that role, got that role, moved the family up to the Western Province of PNG,
Wow.
and in fact, our youngest child was not quite walking at that stage, and that was an amazing experience. So
Yeah.
really, when I arrived, the industry was in yet another of its downturns, and Octetti was not breaking even, and we made a lot of changes, got the costs down so that we were actually starting to make some money. And then a year later, as happens in the industry, the China boom started, and then it was okay. Now we need to get on to some regional exploration. How much do you need for exploration programs? So we literally went from the bottom to the top of a curve within a year. So,
So a combination of timing and good decisions, perhaps along the way, right? Because that was a decision not lightly made to move a family, to
yes.
such a location.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, you wouldn't change anything there, or?
No, not at all.
No.
I loved my time in New Guinea. The other point to make is that I applied for a senior mine geology role at Octetti. When I stepped off the plane, they said, "Congratulations, you're the chief geologist." And I'd been offered a chief geologist role a few times previously in my career, and thought, "No, I'm not really up to that level at this stage." What I very quickly learned, and I do tell this to a lot of young women in the industry, I already had the skills to actually do the chief role. I stepped straight into it and thought, wow, if I hadn't actually had it handed to me, if that had been a chief geologist role that they'd advertised, likely would not have applied. So,
So that's interesting, because I like to sort of hook in on that a little bit, because one of the things that I check in with myself regularly, whether the confidence dial is not over tilting, right? It's the
yes.
you don't want to lack confidence, because you'll miss opportunities, not for yourself, but also to contribute to things where you actually do have the skills and the contributions to make, but you just don't believe enough in yourself. But it's a finicky balance, because if you're too confident, then you'll make an ass out of yourself. So and if you're talking to younger or graduates coming in the industry, I speak to some really good people, but you can tell that they just need a tiny bit more confidence, right? Is that what
Yes.
you would tell your younger self there? You should have applied, or did it work out for the reason that the dial was in the right place all along?
I think it worked out for the reason that the dial was in the right place. But yeah, look, I think I could have actually really stepped up more earlier in my career. Sure, I had 4 very little kids that I had to also factor into career progression. But armed with that knowledge, and having 3 years at Octedi, loved every minute of it. The opportunity came up to move to the Sepon mine in Laos. And look, if anybody had told me earlier in my career that I was going to be doing mine geology and brownfields exploration, working around unexploded ordnance, I would have laughed.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what I was doing. So what it really meant was that in terms of planning out activities, you had to do them far more in advance than what you would in a non-UXO mine. So I think it was fascinating that the Sepon mine was in the most heavily bombed part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and you just never knew what you were going to find. And look, I think our worst, and luckily the detonator had dropped off the bomb, but I think the worst scenario or situation was the 2 separate mining contractors working toward a line in the middle of one of the pits. We did sweeping for ordnance at the beginning of every shift and at lunchtime, but there was a no man's land that was only a couple of metres wide, probably between the two. And I wasn't actually out in the pit that afternoon, but one of my structural geologists was on a berm immediately above when one of the excavators picked up a 500-pound bomb and loaded it into a haul truck. Now, if that detonator had still been attached, that could have been absolutely tragic. But luckily, it wasn't. So a whole different dimension to geology.
I find when I've been there a couple of times, and the bombs on display, right? There's these huge things right in the front of the building, and I think they've got a team of 50 employed on an ongoing basis to deal with these things. Yeah, fascinating history. Never really considered it because it isn't sort of part of the mainstream media, that story, I guess, as much as Vietnam was. And the most bombed part, that really hit home. And if you walk around there, I didn't know you, so that's funny. I mean, this happens all the time, I guess, but there's probably a lot more tie lines there. But that would have been a fascinating role. So that was after the PNG role.
That was after the PNG role. Look, it was fascinating. It was also a very challenging role. We had a beautiful copper ore body that we just started mining as I arrived, and we were mining 25% copper. It was basically chalcocite, and so of course the Lao geologists, not having a history in mining, were asking, "Is this good?" And I said, "Oh yes, absolutely." But the gold ore bodies, the resource estimate was challenged and did need a complete revamp. We were getting very poor reconciliation results, and so that was actually a very challenging time coming in to basically reset the gold estimates and get them right.
So what year was this roughly?
So I was there 2005 and for the first part of 2006.
Okay. It was 18 years ago. I was only there 5, 6, 7 years ago, so a lot has changed since then. But
I'm sure
still a nice ore body.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And from there on, so what after that? So you
Yep.
spent a bit of
So
time. So you took the family there as well, or were you doing a
yes,
fly? Yeah.
no, the family was based in Vientiane.
Yeah.
But by that stage, my daughter she was in boarding school in Perth. My father was dying from cancer, and so it was a tough time. I was
Yeah.
pretty much spending 5 weeks at a time out on site, and then having a couple of weeks back with the family. That was the roster that best suited.
Yeah.
Um, so I was offered a manager role with BHP based in Perth it was near almost the middle of 2006, and opted to take that role.
Yeah.
That was actually really good. Manager resource governance. It was a global role.
Yeah.
It meant that the family could stay in one spot, and that was important because my second eldest child was about to start high school, and I knew, having dragged the kids around the world and indeed through various towns in Australia, that it was about time I gave them some stability.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of a 15-year career with BHP, and that was the first corporate role. So it was 23 years into my career when I took that role.
Right.
But got to work on, again, some of the most beautiful ore bodies in the world, and so it was a geologist's dream, to be honest.
So what's the right set of what's the combination of skills that lands somebody a role like that? I mean, there's obviously a bunch of decisions that you've made to go and invest that time to live in places that are challenging, with probably operational challenges that are difficult.
Yes.
Setting up resources in Sepon from scratch under those conditions. It sounds very easy as you sort of float those sentences out, but it's that's challenging. So is that you obviously achieve stuff there, and that puts you on the radar. I'm thinking here with people who are listening, say, hey, there's a lot of people interested in building their careers, and what combination of skills is required to then get you picked up by BHP. There's obviously a great technical capability there that you must have in order to operate in a role. And I hate to utter the term soft skills, but what other things do you need to possess to work in a role like that and to get there?
Yeah, so you're right about the technical, but yes, you're also right about the soft skills. And I think it's important. I think it was very, very good for me to work with different cultures, lots of different nationalities, both in PNG and also in Laos. We were a League of Nations, and the penny dropped for me one morning in a pre-start production meeting where I can't remember what the challenge was, but we were all working together to solve a challenge, and as each person with their relative discipline and their background and their different culture around the table put their thoughts forward, the penny dropped that this is why diversity is so important, because we came to a really good outcome that morning. But I was just blown away by the fact that if we had all had similar backgrounds and those soft skills as well as the technical skills, we would not have achieved what we achieved. So I think it's really important to recognise the skills that you develop by working with people across the world.
Yeah.
I think it's also very important to have an inclusive team, to be transparent with that team. I'm very, very big on understanding what the strategy is, irrespective of where you work, and being able to link that strategy and the story around that strategy to the work that people do on a day-to-day basis, because people really need to understand, they need to know how they fit in. And it's not just about what the work is that is being done, but it's also about why they're doing that work. And so, I am very inclusive with my teams. But it's also, you obviously build resilience, because there's been plenty of times, through the career I've had to draw on a lot of resilience.
Sure.
If you know that you're right in terms of what you're pushing forward, and that really should be data supported.
Yeah.
You don't back down. You gently move forward. I used to say in PNG, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But
It's a
yeah,
gentle part that interests me, because interviewing or talking to people, because I don't see these as interviews, as conversations with really interesting people, I call them. There's a trend coming out. There is a gentleness, and there's a solidness to these level of roles where I don't want to say unemotional, because we're all emotional in our own different ways. But I think the reason why I would never perform in a role like that is because I'm way too, emotional about trajectories and strategies and things and clients and people and companies and all sorts of things. And that is well known to not be a good mix at the sort of higher end of things. People, a company like BHP, they want people who are steadily, gently perhaps growing a team and not overreacting to situations and so on. So that's definitely, and the same when I listen to your input around York, the measuredness of that. There's a wisdom that comes from time that obviously, is very important in roles like these to make that work, right? And completely get the strategy part, because at that level, if you don't know where you're going, you're just doing stuff. It has to rhyme with a bigger context. So I just want to go back to diversity and inclusion, because no clicks and no views without controversy, right? So I'm saying that jokingly, obviously, but Mr. Musk, and I'm certainly not a fan, but I do like interesting people, so I do follow what they say, denounced diversity and inclusion this morning on his X platform. And, it got me thinking, because obviously in the mining industry, and I had no intention to talk about diversity and inclusion as a subject, but it is such a live discussion on so many levels. And it shouldn't be, right? We can go there as well. But I'm interested when you lifted it out, because we do get an overcorrection happening on a number of fronts. And like with education now, right? We keep talking about why geologists are not coming in this industry anymore. I was really passionate about it. You know what, Jill? After 3 years of talking about it, I'm fucking tired about talking about it. I'm done.
Yep.
I get it. It's a problem. And we need to focus and we need to do stuff. But there's all these initiatives, and half of them I think, it's not going to make an iota of difference. The diversity and inclusion that he denounced, trying to finish my train of thought there. Are we getting that right from a industry perspective? I know how active you are in this space, and even from a company perspective, because I know BHP have quotas, right? And it's
Yes.
that good old sort of equality of opportunity and quality of outcome kind of piece that, is that the right way forward? Should other companies adopt that as well? And how do you sit in that space?
Yeah. So yes, you're right that the BHP does have quotas. I think the quota, probably when it came in, when Andrew Mackenzie put it into place a few years ago now, I think it just got the momentum going. I think it was an audacious a goal that he set, but it was done for a reason, which was to get people moving. Now, we didn't always get it right. And so, there were examples of enticing women into the industry from other industries. They didn't have the understanding of what the mining industry is all about. And there were quite a few that within 12 months had exited again. So I think, being able to provide more understanding and awareness about what the industry is about is really, really important. Personal view, if I have exactly the same skill set for both a male and a female for a role that I'm intending to recruit, I will choose the female. However, if I haven't ever had, but if I had, say, 70% of people in my team as female, well, then in that scenario, I would choose the male. So,
Right. That makes
I
perfect
think
sense,
balance.
right?
Yeah, balance is really important. But if a male is far more superior than a female, I will choose the male. For the particular role. I did get caught out, or caught myself out a few years ago. I was recruiting for a hard rock seismic specialist, and that was with my geoscience excellence team at BHP. And I kept saying, when we find him, when we recruit him, and that was an unconscious bias.
Yeah.
We did interviews. I think we interviewed 5 or 6 people. the only female that we had on the shortlist was an absolute standout. And so, we recruited her. So I had to check myself in that situation. I was quite shocked that I had made an assumption that that the geophysicist would be a male. So
interesting, because
it's having an awareness.
Well, it is the awareness, and that's why I mean, we don't run quotas. I mean, we're exactly the same. If two people apply and comma all other things being equal, because it does depend on the composition of your team, not just from obviously from. I mean, if we, for instance, if we have 50% male and 50% female. But if we have 80% 50 pluses and 20% 20 pluses, I might choose, So there's all these variables that all fit in the diversity and inclusion space. And I don't actually know the context to which the denouncement was made this morning, but I think it was under the context of probably overcorrection, where a lot of it turns into virtue signaling. And I didn't mean that BHP would do that because they were obviously a leader in that space at the time to achieve a certain outcome. And I'm gathering from what you say that outcome was achieved by doing that, even though there were some missteps along the way. Because you end up putting people in roles that arguably after 12 months you go like, oh well, that actually didn't work because we didn't employ the best person in that role. And you've got to be prepared to accept that.
That's right. And I'm very big on neurodiversity as well. My youngest son, who's now 23, is dyslexic. And so seeing 3 non-dyslexic older children, and then the youngest being dyslexic, he's great with numbers, but it's the words that challenge him. He thinks very, very differently, really, in a really incredibly diverse way. He could read a map when he was very, very young. And I was thinking, great, this one might be a geologist, but not yet. But the way he thinks is really, really good. So I actually mentioned that to, we were doing some research work, sponsoring some research at the University of Bristol, and we had an incredible postdoc geomorphologist. And I happened to mention to her that I think at the time my youngest was doing year 12, and I happened to mention dyslexia to her. Now, this was a lady who she had produced some incredible output for BHP, which ultimately saved millions in a drilling program, because she was able to show that the area that we were targeting, we were not going to actually find anything that met our criteria. But she turned to me and she said, Jill, I'm dyslexic, and my husband is, and my 2 children are. And I was just floored. I just said, I could never tell that you were. And she said, I work really, really hard at it. I then mentioned it to one of my very senior peers at BHP, same thing, I'm dyslexic. And that didn't surprise me, actually, because I could see that particularly the BHP person thinks laterally really, really differently. So you're right. I think it's really important that we embrace diversity, and diversity comes in many, many forms, but you're going to end up with a much richer team to work with if you've got that diversity in it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I try to model the same things with RSC as well. Don't always get it right, because I'm probably neurodiverse myself.
Most of us probably are.
Most of us probably are. That's right. So it's, but that it also it creates a far more fun environment. You don't want to have 50 of yourself running around, or 50 of one particular type of whatever the classifications are. So it makes a lot of sense. But so after BHP, because we're almost at T equals 0. What happened then? Bring us to today.
Right, so after BHP, the last 2 years of BHP, I actually took on a Vice President Technical Capability role, and that was really because I am very passionate about getting people into the industry. You mentioned that before. I had to set up a strategy, which I did, and the strategy was not just for BHP people, but for the industry more broadly in terms of what we could do to upskill people. Worked with a consulting group to develop a a capability framework that we could use across the company. There was a technical side, there was a soft skills side, but it gave us the tools to actually understand where the knowledge hotspots were, where the gaps were across the various commodity groups and globally. That was super important. It also helped then to be able to understand what learning did the workforce need to actually close those gaps. And we did a really great collaborative piece, mostly focused in the mining engineering space. With AMPS out of Perth, BHP and Anglo American co-funded. Rio Tinto was in the room when we were talking about basically the subjects that needed to be covered, the curriculum. And those modules have been landing for the industry to access for probably about the last 6 or 8 months. And
Cool.
so that was useful. There was a second piece. I designed a first-year intern program for BHP, got commitment for 5 years of funding for that, bringing 60 students in per year, but it was to give them exposure. So first year science, first year engineering, kids who didn't really know what they wanted to do. But similar to, I guess, my own experience, it was a couple of weeks geology exposure, a couple of weeks mining engineering, and a couple of weeks metallurgical engineering.
Yeah.
These are kids who really knew nothing about the mining industry. And
Cool.
the success measures were 20% of those kids, if they went back to their universities, and we had to talk to the unis about enabling a transfer to a resources-related degree if the kid came back and said, I really want to do a resources role, therefore I need to study for it. Success measure was going to be if we had 20% of those students convert, we would be successful. First year we had 100%. Now that was after I'd left BHP that I got the stats, but I saw some stats recently. They're still sitting on 85%, having run it for 3 years.
Jeez.
So,
but how?
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm taking a punt here, but I'm sure that all of that work didn't fit in a 38-hour work week, right? I mean, was this part of the PD, or I'm just fascinated by how that works at that level, or did you just tell people this is what I really want to do, and you did it on the side, or
that was a full-time focus role.
Full-time focus
for that 2 years. Yeah, there were things that I've been thinking about for a while, having had discussions, across the industry. So, and I did have one person who assisted me with just bringing those programs to a point where they could be launched. The third one was collaboration with Susie Urbaniak and the Core Learning Foundation to design. And my kids they still say to me, "Oh, you used to get cranky with us when we would play games instead of doing our homework, and now you're actually proposing games to get kids interested into the industry." So we decided that we needed to have a tool that could be used as part of the curriculum for a couple of really key years when kids are impressionable, to give them an introduction to the resources industry. So we selected year 6 and year 8. Year 6, there's a theme, and it's all built on Minecraft. So there's a theme which really looks at a hypothetical remote gold mine in the Northern Territory, and the work that the company does to actually help against natural disasters. So there's that theme, and then there's the year 8 theme ties right into their curriculum, which is Intro to Earth Science. And the kids get to compete against each other, pretending that they're a stromatolite and creating oxygen. They get to take a deep sea module down into a primordial sea in search of black smokers, and they go through the whole value chain basically, and ultimately end up loading iron ore. This is set in the Pilbara. Loading iron ore onto ships. And they get to drill holes, etc. as well, identify rocks. And that's been really, really successful. We actually got funding from the Minerals Council to develop the concepts that Susie and I had, we then collaborated with a couple of IT people who could convert our ideas into a proposal for the game developers. And so that was a really fascinating
Did that come
experience.
with the free gaming chair that you're sitting on, or that?
This is my son's. Yes. Good point. So that was the last 2 years of BHP. There wasn't anything that I could see on the horizon at the end of that 2 years. At about that time, I was tapped on the shoulder for the role that I've just finished with Newcrest. And they did say that they had a role that I thought would be fun, and it was really, really enjoyable. Again, some beautiful ore bodies, a really, really highly skilled team. For the first time, I actually had a team of mineralogists working for me, which was brilliant. Mineralogy
really
going
understand
through
the
to
rocks.
the geometallurgy and materials handling, and so that was an absolute privilege to have those experts working for me as well. And that journey, could have continued, but Newmont saw that we had some pretty amazing ore bodies that they really wanted in their portfolio, and so
probably your fault because you did such a good job that they had to take you over.
But they already had people doing the role that I was doing, so I was fairly sure that when the takeover happened, it would be a handover, and so that's where I find myself.
Today. So what now? What's next? More education stuff, because you explained that with a bit of passion, and there is, I'm getting wary of it, I should probably say, but there's much more to do there, and there's some people doing some really cool stuff there, and I'm sure that having already worked in these pretty high up roles, that what else is exciting enough to get into? What do you want to get into now?
Yeah, look, it's a really, really good question. I've still got at least one really meaty role left in me, I think. But it's where do I focus my attention? So I am very, very big, have been for years in it's not just a geology focus. You can't do geology without collaborating with your peers, and so with mining engineers, the metallurgists, and every other group that really pulls together to create a great outcome. So look, the next role could be a GM technical type role, or it could be something really quite different. I am very passionate about the ESG that the industry has to adopt, and hence I put my hand up to lead the ESG working group, JORC, because we need that license to operate going forward. The world needs the products that we deliver, but we need to be doing that in an environmentally sensitive and sustainable way. And I guess one of the things that does worry me currently about the industry is there is a lot of greenwashing. There's a lot of spruiking about what is going to be done, but I'm very much a delivery person. So, if I commit to something, it happens. And so I do think that there is lots of potential in that space to help industry better achieve what it needs to achieve, even if it isn't totally, on board with how it gets to achieve what has to happen.
Well, let's maybe jump into that a little bit further, because I like the greenwashing comment, but there's two sides of that, right? We need it because we need to get mainstream, right? There's only one way to get capital flowing back into our industry, and it's the capital that we need desperately to make some of these things work, right? So the greenwashing, to a degree, I mean, the reason why copper is a critical, mineral is only for that reason, right? Because it's still just the construction that's really driving that. I mean, the reason that bloody copper price isn't moving, because simple supply and demand, right? I mean, it's in the future, and people are thinking about it, and yes, we need all of that, but the reason it's not moving, because we're not needing it right now, because it isn't moving. I'm not explaining that very well, but so the greenwashing, I just heard a few weeks ago, and I just remember this now, and I promised that I would look it up, but I keep forgetting to do so. There were these 3 or 4 or 5 major outside funds, global funds supported by billions of, I don't live in that space, so people will correct me here, and they had just decided to get into this mining investment large. So that was I think it was on Financial Review or Reuters or something, or website, and I thought, okay, that's the sort of stuff that we need. The ESG, I'm just going to link this with the ESG stuff, because the Panama thing obviously is a bloody debacle, right? I mean, that's such a problem that we need to deal with as an industry, and we're not doing that. And sorry, I'm jumping around here a little bit, but with your interest in ESG, maybe your thoughts on what's happening there, and then even bringing in what we're doing with Jork now, because are we actually doing enough as an industry to make people aware? And the letters ESG are just a little bit of a bucket term for the issue at large, right? And not necessarily the EDS or the G. But what do we need to do to try and get to a question to make this more mainstream, and to actually make people aware that we are doing a good job by and large with this ESG thing? And Panama perhaps being an example there, where I mean, there's plenty more terrible things happening around that we should focus on. So what's happened there, and what can we do to get more mainstream with this, and convince people to back us up here in this industry? Is that a question? Don't know. Take it anywhere you like.
It is. Yeah, I think one of the challenges is that bad news sells, and so where things don't go right, the media love it, and they will, and so when you have the battle, I guess, against the bad news sales piece, you have people who are very visual, and they will remember the picture of the tailings dam that failed, and they think, mining equals tailings dam failure, et cetera, et cetera. I think as an industry, we could do more to show the success stories, and we probably are not doing enough in that space, because again, you get one go at educating, and it all comes back to education. You get one go at educating a member of the public about what you can do that is going to make their life better, but without actually damaging the environment that they live in.
What does that look like? I mean, I've heard that phrase uttered before. We need to do better at this, and we're all telling that. But what does doing better look like? Take Oceana here, who has got a nice mine just a couple hours up the road, right? And they're doing a pretty damn decent job, right? And in terms of what they're doing with the environment and looking after the place, from a mining perspective, it doesn't get much better than that. And they're going out in social media, but what more can you do? I mean, can the MCA do more? Can Alzheimer do more? Which group, which body needs to do what? Can BHP spend, instead of a few $100 million, $100 million to do whatever it is? What does it look like doing more?
Look, I think it probably looks like, and again, we're almost saturated in social media with companies saying, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. The question then is, are they all doing what they say they're doing? I actually think that we're almost getting desensitized because we've got so much of that social media, spruiking, whether it's real or not. So maybe there's an opportunity for a collaboration with media outlets where, instead of having the article about the collapsed tailings dam, there is an article that is from an independent source. So it's not a company themselves doing that spruiking, but is able to actually show. And really, it's probably a case of starting with the local communities and working out from there. I think a lot of governments are becoming a lot more nationalistic, rightly so, about their in-ground assets. And so, you look at the PNG situation with Porgera, and to a point, exactly what's happened with First Quantum. It's a case of, yes, you educate the public, but you also need to educate the politicians.
But isn't it? Sorry to interrupt. But isn't it just? I promise not to utter the word pendulum anymore. But isn't that just moving with exactly these political trends that we're seeing now? I mean, New Zealand just voted, and it's gone the other way, being half Kiwi and half Dutch. The Dutch also just had Mr. Crazy come into power. So, man, that's scary stuff. And you can see that happening. But with that probably comes more of a focus back out of that, kumbaya campfire singing stuff, and back into reality of we need this stuff if we want to create this new future.
Yes.
And to what degree can we influence that with these media stories? I'm not so sure if that's what we can do. And I'm sure you've seen the work that Geologize, that the
Yes.
UK-based group is doing, and I find it really interesting. And it's all very, very good to put, warm, positive things out on social media and in normal mainstream media. But you're right. I mean, even a war in Ukraine is already on the back burner for most people on the
Yes.
media side.
Yep.
People have
Yep.
such a short attention span.
Correct.
I don't know, and this is maybe I've become a bit of a nihilist here. That it almost it almost doesn't matter what you do to try and move the needle on this, but you feel compelled to do something. But I'm more and more questioning what it is that we can truly do to make a difference here. Too
Yeah,
negative?
I
Don't
I
know.
do think it is about showing where we do things right, and again, it is about starting in the local community. And I think back to I have relatives in parts of Victoria where there was some not great stuff that was done by small gold mining
Yeah.
companies, north of Melbourne, probably 20 plus years ago. They were very, very anti resources
Yeah.
because of their personal experience. And yet, there are examples of where things are done really well. So I was at the Boddington gold mine for a number of years, and in general, I think the community was a bit hostile when mining first started. But generally, there's a really nice relationship between the mine and the local community. So it's actually about we're learning what worked and celebrating that versus what went wrong. So I just think we're also partly recovering from a number of decades where companies didn't do the right
Oh,
thing.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and again, it's that people remember the bad stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a restaurant review. People generally only give the bad ones and
I mean, it's the
leave the
same.
good ones.
I call it the Uber 5-star rating. If you have somebody who's 4.6, don't. It sounds really good. Don't get into that car, right? I mean, there's only
Yeah,
two or three
yeah.
bad readings or bad reviews, and everything gets drawn so much to that. Yeah, I find it. Yeah, interesting. Well, so to the ESG and the role. So, if you could find, what does an ESG role look like? I know there's companies obviously who focus their entire consulting around ESG. There's some really specific specialists in that space now. Obviously,
Yes.
we have competence building for specialist roles that focus on that. And some of these people are geologists, with
Yes.
backgrounds in
Yeah, true.
geology, and we know the same people probably there, but. I still find it, on a lot of companies' books, it's just a thing to make the shareholder aware that
True.
they've got the right green label, and then
Yes.
they can move on again. But yeah,
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a space for connecting the day-to-day, resource management technical piece with what is required for ESG. So I think those specialists absolutely have their place,
yeah,
but it is actually how do we get the two together so it's seamless and it's not, as you said, it's not the little initiatives that sit on the top from the ESG perspective because you have to put a sustainability report out and you want to be showing that you're doing something. It's actually about what are the really meaty things that can be done that are integral with respect to the day-to-day operation of a mine.
So, which companies are getting it right? I mean, do you know who should we lift out as an example? I mean, that would be nice if we can say, hey, these companies are doing a pretty good job at this. It's
Yeah. It's a good question as to which is there a standout. There's probably not a standout from my perspective. I think in pockets, a
yeah,
number of companies are doing some. Actually, no. There is one that I'm really, really impressed with, and that is LKAB in Sweden. So they've done what they said that they were going to do. I have had a look at Malmberget and Karuna,
yeah,
automated mines, speaking with the operators or the people who were previously operators who are now doing other roles, and whether that's remote operation of gear or doing a completely different role. They are incredibly positive, full electrification of mines. So they've just quietly got on with it. I was there
interesting.
in 2017 as an add-on to running a half marathon in Göteborg,
Yeah,
but I was really impressed even back then that they had intentionally developed the iron ore basically nodules that they were producing, but they were green.
Yeah.
Pisolites, effectively. They are well ahead, I think, of a lot of the industry in terms of their innovative thinking, and just the way that they operate. And they've taken diversity to another level as well with their technology arm, which is Wasara. One of their key people there, his previous role was designing human heart valves. So
Yeah.
they are actually really impressive.
Yeah. That's really cool because it's disappointing to hear that it's the Scandinavians again who've got everything right. It's not only the happiest place to be, but also the best education and so on. We need to just map everything on the Scandinavians, and things will be right. But
that's probably it. But I think it's also, if they say they're going to do something, the integrity is high. So
well, that's
they
important,
just
but
get it done.
that needs longevity, obviously, and that needs a board that is stable and with the right strategy, and not
Yes.
just dancing to what the latest fad is on the market to keep particular shareholders happy. So that needs long-term visions, obviously. And maybe that's another angle that I wouldn't mind touching on. But yeah, it's the how you snuck in running a half marathon there amidst all of it. I don't know how you do all of that, but because as a runner myself, you don't just go and run a half marathon. You need to dedicate a certain amount of hours in a week to run around the house to run a half marathon. So.
Yeah, no, you have to be very, very dedicated, and some of the training was done in the dark. And actually, my youngest was learning to drive at the time, and on Saturday morning, I had it really well managed, project management. I had it really well managed. He would go off he'd do his driving lesson, and they'd end up at his cello teacher's house in North Perth.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I'd be running up and down the coast. Once he would message me to let me know when his cello lesson was finished, and I would then book an Uber for him to get him home. So I still kept everything happening, but
I bet you just like me, you have an Excel sheet for everything, right? It's
there's always a checklist. Yes,
there's always a checklist. Well, that's another common thread there. But then and again, Karuna also a place where I've spent a bit of time, so I know how hard it is to if you want to still train when you're up there, then you're gonna either run in the dark or when it's really, really cold. So it's
yes.
Yeah. No, that's great. And maybe just before I come back to the strategy part, I do want to ask you more about ESG and particularly with Jorg, right? Because I've talked to a number of people, or talked with a number of people about ESG and Jorg, and the question is, what's going to change, and are all these mines now suddenly going to fall over because of ESG? And my answer has been, well, nothing. I can't read anything that is so different than in the previous version. I mean, it's just we lifted it out and there's a focus on it, but it was always there to be looked at, right? So that's probably right. But it is a reasonable argument to ask, are we doing enough? And if it isn't going to actually change, then that would support that argument even further. I mean, what is the future Jorg? And we can't talk about what's obviously specifically in there.
Yes.
But
yes.
Having been so directly involved with it, could we do more, or are we just kicking the can down the road for another future update? What's been the vibe around your particular work group table there as to what we can do?
We've so I guess, and again, it will go out for comment fairly shortly, but we thought it was important. PERC had just delivered their update as we were starting our process, and they had called ESG out separately, and we did think it was important to have a separate clause. And yes, it's always been a consideration for modifying factors, but that doesn't mean that it has always been considered. And I can think of a lot of examples where companies have actually wasted money because they've developed something to a point and then discovered,
exactly.
I use a real example, I won't say where, but that there was a troop of chimpanzees that were quite unique and in a particular area where a mine would otherwise have been developed. And the decision was then, we'll sell we'll sell
It's not New Zealand.
the deposit because we're not going to move forward. So, if you'd actually focused on that as a consideration up front, we wouldn't have spent the money to actually do a lot of work and then realise that you were just never going to be able to develop that asset. So, that's just one example.
But that's the problem, Jill. I mean, because as a consultant doing resources and reserves, at some point, we are feeling the heat, and we've had, and I think I covered this on this channel before, we've been involved with more than a couple of projects where in the end, it fell over on either E or S grounds, the local community. And there is a real, when you actually look at the word reasonable, more likely than not, etc. There are going to be resources where the competent person will decline to sign off, right? And I think that that is coming more and more. Certainly, that is going to create more pressure on the already pretty scarce resource base.
Yes. Yep, absolutely agree. So I guess one of the other things that we have done, and again, this will come out later, but we are developing a guidance document that goes with the JORC code, and an excellent piece of work that was spearheaded by Bruce Harvey, which was to develop a matrix, really separated into each of the areas of E, S, and G, but then across the value chain. So I actually saw this tool as being super important because it really is there to guide a practitioner right at the beginning of the piece of work that they're doing. So whether that's to start greenfields exploration, it actually gives them the checkpoints to say, what have I got to think of in the ES and G space before I start this piece of work? And then that moves through to, if they're successful and they actually discover something, it moves through to what have I got to do in that project assessment space, the resource characterisation space, what have I got to do in the operational space, and then, in ultimately the closure space. And, with closure, I think the industry is getting more mature in the way they think about closure. Closure should be planned from the very beginning, not an afterthought. And so that's a maturity that I think we are developing. We've still got a fair way to go. So I think having a tool like that, it's not just about what the reporting requirements are. Sure, it gives guidance as well for that, but it's really to guide the practitioner to think, okay, what have I got to know about biodiversity, for example, if I'm exploring in a particular area? Is there something that is an absolute red flag that is going to bring this project unstuck? And it all comes back to having a risk-based approach to everything that you do. If you actually understand what are the possible risks, then you will actually work out what are the controls that I've got to have in place to actually manage those risks. So that was really what the intent is for the ESG component.
And I think the intent is the right intent, and obviously the risk is another component that will get introduced or lifted out in the next update, that they will go hand in hand.
Correct.
I'm pretty sure. But I think what I'm getting to is, if you give somebody a gun, they're going to shoot it, right? So meaning to say, if you now give them this table with all these things to look at that could be possibly wrong, chances are that, now you can't unsee it, right? And not that you would want to, but now you're basically telling people, hold on, all these boxes need to be ticked, and the competent person is going to go, okay, I can't tick these boxes, which is exactly what we want to achieve. But I don't know if we've considered the impact that will have on the resource bases as they sit at the moment. We all know how many resources are sitting on the balance sheets that shouldn't be there. And right, I mean, for a number of reasons, they don't, and a lot of them are RPEE, I guess, if you consider it. But I want to go back to the actual question. I don't think we're going to see a waterfall, with 2 days after JORC codes get released, that we're going to see billions of dollars written off the balance sheets. But there is going to be there are going to be some high-profile cases where it's going to be quite contentious whether these things should sit on the books. First Quantum being one of them, right? And a project here in New Zealand that's sitting in natural parks. Is that a resource? Not so sure, right?
No, probably not.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to. Yeah, Likely not, but you see my point, and so, but you don't see that turning into a landslide or a bigger issue. Are we worried about this? What's going to happen?
Look, I think the guidance is there as guidance only. It's not mandatory, so it really the matrix will be a tool for people to consider. The actual in terms of what the code will require, and in a mandatory sense, a practitioner to do is really highlighting that you have to consider this as one of your modifying factors when you're considering a conversion from a resource to a reserve. So, I think that's the piece. Yes, we've also added into Table 1. We're calling it out more because it's always been there sort of intuitively, but it hasn't been called out previously. And so whether a practitioner just doesn't have enough awareness and therefore they've, by accident omitted to consider certain aspects of ESG, or whether, they have preferred to remain silent on things that they should have otherwise been reporting on. If the question is there very specifically, they can always say, no, it's not relevant to me for the following reason, but it doesn't allow them to then just go, well, ESG, not super important. So I think it's really the intent is to encourage people to think about it, even though, yes, it has always been there.
Yeah, I mean, again, nothing wrong with the intent. I'm just somewhat worried about our lack of visibility on the impacts that it will have. I can imagine the brokers in the capital investment market already sort of having an eyebrow raised as to, okay, hold on, what does that mean for some of our portfolio, right?
Look, it could.
And I'm not sure whether, us geologists, right, some who have more governance and corporate experience than others are not too drawn into nitpicking around what should and ought and miss out on the reality of some of these impacts in a market that is already not really catalyzing what we need with these projects. So look, we can drop that. I mean, it's such a vexed topic, but I'm unsure about what impact it actually got, because if it has no impact, then what's the purpose of changing it, right? That's the other argument. So if you actually change the rules, then you're hoping for a change, which can only move in one direction. It can only move down. It's not going to go up in terms of what we sign off as resources or not. We're only going to be, that's got to be the intent, because otherwise, why the hell are we putting it in? Now, percentually, I wouldn't be able to pull a number and say, look, this is the impact. But I wouldn't be surprised that in a 5-year period, because I'm going to call out some numbers, because we have to have a framework of reference, that we would see 5-10% of resources poof disappearing in a market that is already constrained. Don't know. It's scary.
It's possible, but I think that the upside is that investors and indeed investment groups that want to invest in something that they feel good about because it meets the ESG criteria, there could be more money flowing into the deposits or the discoveries that actually do fit the criteria. And look, just because something comes out doesn't mean that there can't be a piece of work done to actually bring it back in. If it's in a national park, well, no, probably not, unless you can do a land swap or something. But so it'll be interesting. It will be interesting to see how it flows.
Yeah, no, I take your point. I mean, but that ties into the previous discussion we had, because if we can now actually put the spotlight on the good stuff, and we actually now have a stamp that says good stuff, right? Yes. And we have an ability to say this is not the good stuff, and we get that confidence in our market, then it could turn into a good thing, and that's perhaps where we came out of the rabbit hole, and I won't go down deeper. But let me, sorry, and maybe I'm jumping around a bit, but I like the strategy bit that you mentioned, right? So if you're working for a BHP at that level, and then for Newcrest, and you talked about the Swedish companies, or some of them doing the right things, I'm interested in what makes that work. And I had a number of conversations with other people about, successful companies and what is required. So, you're obviously sitting in a position where you can see the world around you quite clearly in terms of when it becomes problematic. I mean, some companies, perhaps arguably, I never worked for a BHP or a Rio. Is there a risk that they get so busy that there's a disconnect between all this wonderful strategy stuff and the folks, at the bottom doing all the work? And again, if you want to lift out some examples of companies who get that right, I mean, Newcrest, I guess, given your tenure there, must have gotten that right. But is there enough talent in the world to sit in these boards to make that work? Because I am seriously doubting that. And how do you pick that talent as an employee as well, right? Because you want to work for the good people who have the right strategies and the visions, because that helps you raise your own career.
Yes.
Are there enough of these people, and are there good companies out there doing good things?
Yeah, it's a good question on sort of the background of certain board members, and we did go through a period where I think there were a majority of people on resources boards were financial, legal / background, and not enough technical. I've seen that start to swing back to more technical basis, certainly at Newcrest and BHP. And so I think that's a positive thing, because they will challenge from a technical perspective the things that are being discussed, and I think that's super, super important. I think the other piece is to have a really, really strong executive team, and be really clear about how a particular strategy and the messaging around that cascades down. So, an agreement between board and executive committee, then moving down into your senior managers, to your more junior managers, to your superintendents and the workforce, on the ground. Everyone needs to have clarity about where what they are doing fits into delivering that strategy. And I think the other really important thing is, and I think we all know this, that you keep the number of initiatives in each space small. So, for example, in Newcrest, the projects and technical leadership team, we had 5 key areas within our strategy that actually delivered the strategy, and it was not more complex than that. And there was really just 1, sometimes 2, that went with each of those key areas, and that was everything from sustainability, and the ESG space, right through to technology, and and how we were applying technology to give us the edge. So very innovative, but absolute clarity on how that flowed down to the workload, right down to the people on the ground at the various operations in exploration. So it's about getting that clarity. It's storytelling effectively.
Yeah. Look, it is. I mean, good leadership is something that I find it. You can pick up a book and read about it, but it's such a difficult thing. Some companies have done really well, and it must be because of the particular leadership. Right? I just saw another recent podcast where Jeff Bezos was interviewed. You got to have some sort of mix about what you're trying to do with a team, and have the right people on board to make that work. Yes. And I can't imagine how people like that run a company. I mean, especially with the entrepreneurial spirits that you see in some of the tech world, right? And we don't really operate like that at all in the mining space. It seems to be very conservative. And that may be another reason why we're not really coming out of our shell, because the entrepreneurialism is far more prevalent in the junior space, right? I talked to a few people that are sort of early 30s, and they run fairly successful juniors, like with fantastic project. And we're lucky enough to be involved with the WA1 team, who are in WA, obviously made a huge discovery. And geez, how old are those guys? So I find it interesting when you build teams, how you shift from a small company to a big company. And I have no idea what goes around at the BHP board table. I can only imagine how fascinating those talks would be. But is that a career pathway that you're interested in yourself, or you're still keen to sort of stay around the technical meaty part as you described?
Oh no. Also the other being on a board is certainly something I'm interested in. And as a representative of Newcrest, for 2023 I have been on the Lundin Gold board, which
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
single asset Fruta del Norte,
yeah,
but a really really interesting role on the board, and my role was technical.
yeah,
So.
yeah,
So yeah, that was actually a great experience. Unfortunately, again because of the takeover, I had to step down from that. But
yeah.
yeah,
What was the key
definitely.
learning out of that experience? What did you expect and went completely different? I mean, because as an example, I mean, coming into some boards, I've always been fascinated by governance and wondered where it is written how you do this stuff. And I always joke there is no PhD in how to be, how to put a board together. People write stuff on it, but I find it. I find it quite interesting. It didn't match my expectations when I look at a younger self, what I thought a board would look like. What did you take away from that experience?
Well, it's interesting. I have done the AICD course about 10 years ago, actually, and I know one of the things that they tell you a lot during the course is make sure that before you join a board that the other board members are going to be the right fit or an approximately
Uh-huh.
right fit for you. And I think that's actually a really really wise piece of guidance. I think the one thing that and I've seen it when I've been presenting to other boards, the one thing that is a little bit frustrating, having had many years of being hands on, is that as a board member you are making, yeah, sure, you're balancing risk against opportunity, you're providing guidance, but you're not hands on the ground. So if you see something that you think, well, I smell the rat, something doesn't smell quite
Yeah,
right.
you want to get
Yes,
into it.
you can engage with the people and you can provide more specific guidance, but you can't get down into the weeds. You can't, but you can actually, I guess, yeah, you can certainly guide to have them think, oh, I hadn't considered that, so that they might just go and have a look to. Yeah, so I guess that's what comes with decades of experience.
Yeah,
So you can usually smell the rats
yeah, yeah,
and hopefully head them off at the pass before they become an issue,
yeah.
which is actually a very privileged place to be on, with a board that works well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said it. I mean, I completely subscribe to that. I mean, your skills might already be available on that board or your particular risk profile, right? Because different people have more of a risk appetite than others. And if you don't balance that right, there's a whole bunch of things that you need to balance. And you might end up sitting somewhere and just being a fifth wheel and not adding any value, or it's so there is a decision to make yourself, and
Yeah.
not all boards are created equal for sure. It's interesting that at the end of the day, I'd be fascinated to sit around some of these. I mean, even the weird ones, a Facebook board meeting. What would that look like with a 20-something? Well, he's probably in his 30s now, but what get discussed there? These are also just people, right? Having daily lives, doing
Yeah.
daily silly things, and struggling with the usual stuff. They're not gods, but making good decisions is what it's about, and to be informed and doing that on good data is important. But hey, look,
Yeah.
anything else? What's on your mind? Other than anything else in the industry that you wish we'd focus on more, or something that you would want to focus on more? What else is on the
Well,
table for you?
Yeah, I did touch on the capability piece before, and it does worry me. I guess, and like I did mention, as a graduate, being able to draw on on hundreds of years of experience, people, because I was the junior by a lot of years. I don't believe that our people in the industry these days get that same opportunity. Yes, we have graduate programs, but it's not the same. And I
Yeah,
think so. I am really, really big on mentoring, and I do annually take on a mentee as part of the International Women in Resources program, and I've had
yeah,
people from all over the world across various disciplines. So I think, as an industry, I think we can do more in that space. But I also do think that there's a really great opportunity for the industry to build on much more so than just the AMPS mining engineering program that is being rolled out, but across other areas as well. We don't get the opportunity to often to sit in the room, with someone like Dick Solito, who's seen, pretty much every porphyry across the planet. How many I have been privileged to do that, but how many people who are, early in their career get that sort of opportunity? So it's actually, how do we tap into, some great knowledge? Because, you learn by your mistakes, you learn by experience. So I do think there is an absolute gap in the industry right now to lift that talent and put us in a really good position for the future, because people like myself, we're going to start winding down within the next 5 to 10 years, and the next gen that's coming through, how do we impart those learnings to them so that they're not basically making the mistakes that we made, that they're learning from our learnings.
Wake the entrepreneurial spirit in you and take that somewhere. I mean, I know Jackie's working on this. She's created Coombs capabilities very much in the capability building space, as are others,
yes.
Creating tools and not just from an altruistic perspective, but there's obviously also just an opportunity to actually add value there and make it a business model, because there's only so much volunteering and mentoring that you can do to make a dent in it, right? So if you actually have the skills of running big units, big companies, right, and you've got, like you just said, a lot of energy in the tank to grapple something with something big. Maybe you're the chosen one to make the difference here and create something that actually makes the dent, because I think it has to come from people coming up with new concepts that to change the course here in this education space. And that's why I like what Geologize is doing, and I like how that's growing and well done. Yes. And that's a good, but it's a small part in a very specific solution of to that. But I think something bigger needs to be floated to tackle this education thing, and I don't know what it looks like, if it's a global mentoring program or like what Richard is doing with Nexus. It's good, but it's too small, right? It's just
correct.
And because the funding isn't there, and we keep talking about the funding, because if we don't have money for this, then why do we have money for that? We don't have that long-term view. Somebody with the right experience and background could make a huge dent in that, I'm very sure.
Yeah, and it is about, you're quite right, funds are limited, but I think, and there's some really great stuff being done across the globe for universities that do work in the resources space. There's not that many of them, so it's actually, how do we get the university it's collaboration. How do we get the universities collaborating? Because they all have their niches of expertise, but holistically pull all that together, and it would be pretty amazing. Pull it into and all. Don't leave behind the private groups like Jackie's that are working in that space as well. But it's actually, how do we pull it all together? If that was all pulled together, I'm almost positive that the big companies would say, "Hey, we're in here. We're in here to fund."
No, I think you're not wrong there. I think, but it just needs somebody to catalyze that somehow. And because we talked about this subject so many times on this channel as well, and it's always coming down to that same kind of solution architecture. That's we all kind of see what needs to happen, but even and I'm not to single it out, but just because I've spoken to him about this, a guy like Richard, I mean, he has to pay the bills as well, right? I mean, and so people need to make a sacrifice to go and do this, because if you're working in the industry, you've got 25 years experience, you want to, you have an expectation to support the family and so on. It takes a little bit of courage to come up with a fairly new model, but look, now I really appreciate your thoughts there. And any other thoughts you want to impart on the discussion here? What else is floating in your mind? 100 things, I'm sure, but what did we miss?
Yeah, what have we missed? Look, I think maybe just in terms of the the metals, the products that are going to get the planet to a future low emission space. I think we need to think about how we don't all run like a group of 5-year-olds in a soccer match to the next new shiny thing like lithium, and then find that the old supply demand bites people, and then once a company's been bitten in a particular area, it'll shy clear for a period of time. So, I think there is also a piece about let's be more holistic about what does the world really need. I think we know what the world needs, and it is quite a diverse group of elements, effectively, that we need for future state. So it's actually about how do we balance that so that we haven't got everyone rushing to one area and then going, oh, that didn't work, let's rush somewhere else now. But actually holistically looking as an industry at how much is enough in a particular space. And now I have no idea how you solve that problem, but it would make sense that some of those exploration dollars particularly go into other areas that are not just lithium or not just copper. I mean, yes, we need them because we know that, again, supply is going to, particularly in copper, is going to diminish over time. But rare earths, for example.
Well, there are thinking groups. I mean, obviously what's happening in Europe could be a little bit of a blueprint of what we need in the world, right? Because the European Union's come together and now they put this, critical minerals list out like everybody else, right? I mean, what is critical, what's not? I mean, it's still, I'm still a simple guy. If we dig it out of the ground, it's probably for a reason. It's probably because we need it somewhere. But anyway, other than gold, which you could argue about as well, but I'm certainly not a Bitcoin fan, but let's not go there. But I think that model appeals to me, and we could do that at a global scale, right? Having that discussion that you just referenced at a global scale, so that we have a little bit more control on it. I mean, as long as there's investors involved, there will be bubbles, and there will be 5-year-olds chasing that ball around, right? Yes. So that's I don't think that's that'd be hard to fix, but again, that's. Wise words, and I think we can do a lot better. Maybe the next 10 years will tell. I really appreciate your time, Jill. It's been really nice to chat with you. Keep me posted in terms of what your thoughts and ideas are, and where you're going to end up, what you're going to be doing. And if anybody's listening and has got an idea for Jill, then I'm sure she's all ears. So yeah,
I'm happy to hear. Yes,
happy to hear. Yeah, no, we've got some creative people, so that's really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for your time. And I'm sure I'll see you around the Jork table soon enough again. So yeah, nice to chat.
You will.
All right.
Thanks very much, René.
Catch you later.
Bye.